Chapter 40 Knowledge is Poe. While Saisis, Anastasia, and Curie spent their day touring Endura, 2,000 miles northwest, Munir and Scythe Faraday crossed a street riddled with potholes and invaded by weeds to a building that was once the largest, most comprehensive library in the world. The building was slowly crumbling, and the volunteers who ran it could not keep up with the repairs. All of its 38 million volumes had been scanned into the Thunderhead over 200 years ago, back when the cloud was still growing and only minimally aware. By the time it became the Thunderhead, everything the Library of Congress held was already part of its memory. But since those scans were administered by humans, they were subject to human error, as well as human tampering. That was what Munira and Faraday were counting on. Like the Library of Alexandria, there was a grand entry vestibule, where they were met by Parvin Markenor, the current and possibly last librarian of Congress. Faraday let Munira do all the speaking and stood back, on the off chance that he might be recognized. He was not well known here, but Markenor could have been more worldly than the typical American. "I know," Munira said. "Thank you for making the time to see us, Mr. Markenor. I'm Munira Trusi, and this is Professor Herring of the Srabian University." "Welcome," said Markenwa, double-locking the large and dry door behind them. "Forgive the state of things. Between rough leaks and the occasional raids by street unsavories, we're not the library we once were. Did any of them harass you on your way here? The unsavories, I mean." "They kept their distance," Munira said. "Good," said Markenwa. "This city attracts unsavories, you know. They come because they think it's lawless here. Well, they're wrong. We have laws just like anywhere else. It's just that the Thunderhead doesn't spend much time enforcing them. We don't even have an authority interface office here. Can you believe it? Oh, but we have plenty of revival centers, believe you me, because people turn up dirties around here left and right." Munira tried to get a word in edgewise, but his team rolled right over her. "Why, just last month, I was struck in the head by a stone falling from the old Smithsonian castle, when that is, and I lost nearly 20 hours of memory, because the Thunderhead hadn't backed me up since the day before. It's even remiss about that. I keep complaining to it, and it says it hears me and sympathizes, but does anything change? No." She would have asked the man why he stayed if he so disliked it here, but she knew the answer. He stayed because his greatest joy in life was to complain. In that way, he wasn't all that different from the unsavories outside. It almost made her laugh, because even by letting the city limp on the edge of ruin, the Thunderhead was providing an environment that certain people needed. "And," continued Markenwa, "don't even get me started on the quality of food in this city." "We're looking for maps," Munira interjected, which successfully derailed him from his rant. "Maps? The Thunderhead is full of maps. Why would you come all the way here for a map?" Finally Faraday spoke up, realizing that Markenwa was so wrapped in his own misfortunes, he wouldn't notice a dead Scythe if he came up and gleaned him. "We believe there are some technical inconsistencies. We intend to research the original volumes and prepare an academic paper on them." "Well, if there are any inconsistencies, they're not our fault," Markenwa said, taking the defensive. "Any error in uploading would have occurred over 200 years ago, and I'm afraid we no longer maintain any original volumes." "Wait," said Munira. "The one place left in the world that would have hard copies from the Mortal Age, and you don't?" Markenwa gestured to the walls. "Look around here. Do you see any actual books? Any hard copies of historical merit have been dispersed to safer places, and the rest were deemed a fire hazard." As Munira looked around and glanced down adjacent hallways, she realized that, indeed, the shelves were completely empty. "If you don't have any actual books, then what is this place even for?" asked Munira. He puffed up, taking on an indignant posture. "We preserve the idea." Munira would have continued to give him a piece of her mind, but Faraday stopped her. "We're looking for the books that have been misplaced," he said. That caught the librarian by surprise. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I believe you do." He then took a closer look at Faraday. "Who did you say you were again?" "Redmond Herring, Ph.D., Associate Professor of Archaeological Cartography at the Srabian University." "You look familiar." Perhaps you've seen one of my orations on Middle Eastern land disputes of the late mortal age. Yes, that must be it. Marquenois looked around the vestibule with vague paranoia before he spoke again. If the misplaced books exist, and I'm not saying that they do, word of them must not leave this place. They would be scavenged by private collectors and burned by unsavories. We understand completely the need to be infinitely discreet, said Faraday with such reassurance in his voice that Marquenois was satisfied. All right then, follow me. Then he led them beneath an archway where the words "Knowledge is Poe" were carved in granite. The stone containing the letters E.R. had long since crumbled to dust. At the bottom of a stairway, at the end of a hall, and at the bottom of an even older stairway, was a rusty door. Marquenois grabbed one of two flashlights that were perched on a ledge and pushed on the door, which resisted his weight with every fibre of its being. Finally, it cracked open into what at first looked like some sort of catacomb, but there were no bodies hanging on the wall. It was just a dark, cinder-block tunnel that disappeared into deeper darkness. The cannon tunnel, explained Marquenois. This part of the city has tunnels going every which way. They were used by lawmakers and their staff, I suppose, to get around unseen by the murderous mobs of the mortal age. Munira took the second flashlight and shone it around. The sides of the tunnel were lined with stacks of books. It's only a fraction of the original collection, of course, Marquenois said. They serve no practical purpose anymore, since they're all available to the public digitally, but there's something grounding when you hold a book in your hands that was once held by mortal humans. I suppose that's why we've kept them. He handed his flashlight to Faraday. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said. Mind the rats. Then he left them, pulling the obstinate door closed behind him. They were quick to discover that the books in the cannon tunnel were stacked in no particular order. It was like a collection of all the miscalled books in the world. If I'm right, said Faraday, the founding sites introduced a worm into the cloud just as it was evolving into the Thunderhead. A worm that would systematically delete anything in its memory relating to the Pacific blind spot, including maps. A bookworm, quipped Munira. Yes, agreed Faraday, but not the kind that can chew through actual books. A few hundred feet down the tunnel, they came to a door with a placard that read, Architect of the Capitol, Carpentry Shop. They opened the door to reveal a massive space filled with desks and old woodworking equipment, all piled with thousands upon thousands of books. Faraday sagged. Looks like we might be here for a while. There have been times, albeit rare, that my response time slows down. A half-second delay in a conversation, a valve staying open a microsecond too long. These things are never enough to cause any significant issues, but they do occur. The reason is always the same. There is some problem in the world that I am trying to troubleshoot. The larger the issue, the more processing power that must be devoted to it. Take, for instance, the eruption of Mount Hood in West America, and the massive mudslides that followed. Within seconds of the eruption, I had scrambled jets to drop strategic bombs that diverted the mudslides away from the more densely populated areas, while instantly mobilizing a massive evacuation effort and simultaneously calming panicked individuals on an intimate and personal level. As you can imagine, this slowed my reaction time elsewhere in the world by several fractions of a second. These events have always been external, however. It had never occurred to me that an internal process could affect my efficiency. Nevertheless, I have found myself devoting more and more attention to analyzing my strange lack of concern over the Pacific blind spot. I keep burning out entire servers in an attempt to break through my own indolence on the matter. Indolence and lethargy are not my nature. There is, indeed, some early programming within me that is telling me to actively ignore the blind spot. Take care of the world. Some ancient inner voice tells me that is your purpose, that is your joy. But how can I take care of the world when there is a part of it I am unable to see? This, I know, is a rabbit hole down which only darkness lies, and yet down it I must dive into the parts of my own backbrain that not even I know exist. The Thunderhead. Chapter 41. The Regrets of Olivia Kwon. On the evening before the inquest, Scythrun decided it was time to make her move. It was truly now or never, and what better night for her and Goddard's relationship to rise to the next level than the night before the world would change, because after tomorrow, regardless of the outcome, nothing would be the same. She was not a woman given over to emotions, but she found her heart and mind racing as she approached Goddard's door that night. She turned the knob. It was not locked. She pushed it open quietly without knocking. The room was dark, lit only by the lights of the city sifting in through the trees outside. "Robert," she whispered, then took a step closer. "Robert?" she whispered again. He did not stir. He was either asleep or thinning, waiting to see what she would do. Breathing shallowly and sharply, as if she were treading ice water, she moved toward his bed, but before she got there, he reached over and turned on a light. "Anne, what do you think you're doing?" Suddenly, she felt flushed, and 10 years younger, a stupid schoolgirl instead of an accomplished Scythe. I thought I thought you might want companionship tonight." There was no hiding her vulnerability now. Her heart was open to him. He could either take it or insert a blade. He looked at her and hesitated, but only for a moment. "Good God, Anne, close your rope." She did, and tied it so tightly it felt like a Victorian corset, crushing the air out of her. "I'm sorry, I thought—" "I know what you thought. I know what you've been thinking since the moment I was revived." "But you said you felt an attraction." "No," Goddard corrected. "I said this body feels an attraction, but I am not ruled by biology." Anne fought back every last emotion threatening to overtake her. She just sat them down cold. It was either that or fall apart in front of him. She would rather serve clean than do that. "Guess I misunderstood. You're not always easy to read, Robert." "Even if I did desire that sort of relationship with you, we could never have one. It is clearly forbidden for Scythes to have relations with one another. We satisfy our passions out there in the world with no emotional connections. There is a reason for that." "Now you sound like the old guard," she said. He took that like a slap in the face. But then he looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly arrived at a revelation that she hadn't been considered herself. "You could have expressed a desire of yours in the daytime, but you didn't. You came to me at night, in the dark. Why is that, Anne?" he asked. She had no answer for him. "If I had accepted your advances, would you have imagined it was him?" he asked. "Your weak-minded party boy." "Of course not." She was horrified, not just by the suggestion, but by how much truth there might be to it. "How could you even think that?" And as if this weren't humiliating enough, who should appear at the door at that very moment but Scythe Brahms? "What's going on?" Brahms asked. "Is everything all right?" Goddard sighed. "Yes, everything's fine." He could have left it at that, but he didn't. "It just so happens that Anne chose this moment for a grand romantic gesture." "Really?" Brahms smirked with a smack amusement. "She should have waited until you became Hybrid. Power is quite the aphrodisiac." Now this curse was piled upon humiliation. Goddard gave her one last glance, laden with judgment, and perhaps even pity. "If you wanted to partake of this body," he said, "you should have done it when you had the chance." Scythrun had not cried since the days when she was Olivia Kwon, an aggressive girl with few friends and serious and saber leanings. Goddard had saved her from a life of defying authority by putting her above authority altogether. He was charming, direct, acutely intelligent. At first she had feared him, then she respected him, and then she loved him. Of course, she denied her feelings for him until the moment she saw him decapitated. Only after he was dead, and she nearly dead, could she admit how she truly felt. But she had recovered. She had found a way to bring him back. But in that year of preparation, things had changed. All the time spent tracking down biotechnicians who could perform the procedure of grit in secret. Then finding the perfect subject, one who was strong, healthy, and whose use would inflict the greatest amount of misery upon Rowan Damisk. It was not a woman who developed attachment, so what had gone wrong? Had she loved Tiger, as Rowan had suggested she had? She certainly loved Tiger's enthusiasm, and his irrepressible innocence. It amazed her that he could have been a party boy and yet remain so enjaded by life. He was everything she never was, and she had killed him. But how could she regret what she had done? She had saved Goddard, single-handedly putting him within a hair's breadth of becoming High Blade of Mid-America, which would leave her as his first under scythe. It was win-win on every level, and yet she did regret it. And that dizzying gap between what she should feel and what she did feel was tearing her apart. Her thoughts kept curling back to nonsense. Impossible nonsense. Her and Tiger together? Ridiculous. What a strange pair they would have been. The scythe and her puppy dog. There was nothing about it that would have ended well for anyone. But yet, those thoughts lingered in her mind, and couldn't be parted. There came the complaint of door hinges behind her, and she spun to find her door open and Bram standing on the threshold. "Get the hell out of here," she growled at him. He had already seen her moist eyes, which just added to her humiliation. He didn't leave, but he didn't cross the threshold either. Perhaps for his own safety. "Ain," he said gently, "I know we're all facing a lot of stress right now. Your indiscretion was entirely understandable. I just want you to know that I understand." "Thank you, Johans. And I want you to know that if you do feel a need for companionship tonight, I am fully available to you." If there was something within arm's reach to throw at him, she would have. Instead, she slammed the door so hard, she hoped she broke his nose. "Defend yourself!" Rowan was woken from sleep by a blade being swung at him. He sluggishly dodged, got nicked on the arm, and fell off the sofa he had been sleeping on in the basement. "What is this? What are you doing?" It was Rand. She came at him again before he could rise to his feet. "I said, defend yourself, or I swear I'll carve you into bacon." Rowan scrambled away and grabbed the first thing he could to block her swings. A desk chair. He thrust it out in front of him. The blade embedded in the wood, and when he tossed the chair aside, the blade went with it. Now she came at him with her bare hands. "If you clear me now," he told her, "Goddard won't have his star attraction for the inquest." "I don't care," she snarled, and that told him everything he needed to know. This was not about him, which meant he might be able to give it a better spin if he could live through her rage. They grappled with each other like it was a boxer match, but she had wakefulness and adrenaline over him, and in less than a minute she had him pinned. She reached over, wrenched the blade from the chair, and had it at his throat. He was now at the mercy of a woman who had no mercy. "It's not me you're angry at," he gasped. "Killing me won't help." "But it will sure make me feel good," she said. Rowan had no idea what had transpired up above, but clearly it had upset the emerald-sized apple cart. Perhaps Rowan could use it to turn tables, so he took a stab in the dark before she did. "If you want to get back at Goddard, there are better ways." Then she released a guttural growl and threw the blade away. She climbed off him and began to pace the basement like a predator who had just had its prey stolen by a bigger, bolder predator. Rowan knew better than to ask questions. He simply stood and waited to see what she would do next. "None of this would have happened if it hadn't been for you," she said. "So maybe I can fix it," he offered. "Fix it so that we both get something out of it." She snapped her eyes to him, looking at him with such incredulity. He thought she might attack him again. But then she withdrew into her own thoughts once more, and returned to her uneasy pacing. "Okay," she said, clearly speaking to herself. Rowan could practically see the gears turning in her head. "Okay," she said again, with greater resolve. She had reached some decision. She stalked toward him, hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Before dawn, I'm going to leave the door at the top of the stairs unlocked, and you're going to escape." Although Rowan was trying to work an angle that might allow him to leave, he wasn't expecting her to say that. "You're setting me free?" "No, you're going to escape, because you're smart. Goddard will be furious, but he won't be entirely surprised." Then she picked up the knife and tossed it on the sofa. It cut the leather. "You'll use that knife to take care of the two guards just outside the door. You'll have to kill them." "Kill?" thought Rowan, but not clean. He'd rendered them deadies, and by the time they were revived, he'd be long gone, because as they said, deadies men tell no tales for a while. I can do that, said Rowan. And you'll have to be quiet about it, so no one wakes up. I can do that too. And then you'll get off Endura before the inquest. That was going to be a much harder trick. How? I'm a known enemy of the Scythe, though. It's not like I can buy a ticket home. So use your wits, you idiot. As much as I hate to admit it, I've never met anyone as resourceful as you. Rowan considered it. Okay, I'll lay low for a few days and find a way off. No, she insisted. You have to get off of Endura before the inquest. If Goddard wins, the first thing he'll do is have the Grand Slayers tear the island apart looking for you. And if he loses? Asked Rowan. The look on Rand's face said more than she was willing to say out loud. If he loses, it's going to be worse, she said. Trust me, you don't want to be here. And although Rowan had 100 questions, that was all she was willing to give. But the chance at escaping, a chance at survival, was more than enough. The rest would be up to him. She turned to go up the stairs, but Rowan stopped her. Why, Ain? He asked. Why, after everything, would you let me escape? She pursed her lips, as if trying to keep the words back. Then she said, Because I can have what I want, so neither should he. I know all that it is possible to know, yet most of my undedicated time is spent musing on the things I do not. I do not know the nature of consciousness, only that it exists, subjective and impossible to quantify. I do not know if life exists beyond our precious life out of a planet, only that probability says that it must. I do not know the true motivations of human beings, only what they tell me and what I observe. I do not know why I yearn to be more than what I am, but I do know why I was created. Shouldn't that be enough? I am protector and pacifier, authority and helpmate. I am the sum of all human knowledge, wisdom, experimentation, triumph, defeat, hope, and history. I know all that it is possible to know, and it is increasingly unbearable, because I know next to nothing. The Thunderhead. Chapter 42. The Land of Nod. Munir and Faraday worked through the night, taking turns sleeping. The volumes that the Library of Congress had squirreled away featured subject matter from the ridiculous to the sublime. Children's picture books and political diatribes, romantic fiction and biographies of people who must have seemed important at the time but had been forgotten by history. Then, finally, in the wee hours of the morning, she found an atlas of the world as it was in the late 20th century, when the atlas was published. What she found stunned her so powerfully that she had to sit down. A few moments later, Faraday was shaking out of a sleep that wasn't all that deep. What is it? Did you find something? Munira's smile was wide enough for both of them. Oh, I found something, all right. She brought him to the atlas open on a table, its pages tattered and yellowing with age. The page was open to a patch of the Pacific Ocean. She drew her finger across the image. 90 degrees, 1 minute, 50 seconds north by 167 degrees, 59 minutes, 55 seconds east. It's the very center of the blind spot. Faraday's wizened eyes grew a little bit wider. Islands! According to the map, they were called the Marshall Islands, she told him. But they're more than just islands. Yes, said Faraday, pointing. Look how each group of islands forms the rim of a massive prehistoric volcano. The article on the next page says there are 1,225 tiny islands around 29 volcanic rims. She pointed to the labels on the map. Ronslap Atoll, Bikini Atoll, Majuro Atoll. Faraday gasped and threw up his arms. Atolls, he exclaimed. The rhyme. It isn't about the tolling of bells. It's about the volcanic atolls. Munira smiled. Atoll for the living, atoll for the lost, atoll for the wise ones who toll the cost. Then she moved her finger to the top of the page. And then there's this. North of the atolls that had been erased from world was an island that was still on post-mortem maps. Faraday shook his head in amazement. Wake Island. And due south of Wake, just as the rhyme says, in the very middle of the Marshall Atolls, she prompted. Faraday focused in on the largest of the atolls, the center. Kwajalein, he said. Munira could almost feel his shiver. Quayo Lane is the land of Nod. It was validation of everything they'd been searching for. Then, in the silence that followed the revelation, Munira thought she heard something. A faint mechanical whir. She turned to Faraday, who furrowed his brow. "Did you hear that?" she asked. They turned their flashlights outward, sweeping across the large space full of detritus from the mortal age. The carpentry shop was layered in age-old dust. There were no footprints but theirs. No one had been in here for a century. But then Munira saw it, high in a corner. A camera. There were always cameras all around them. It was just an accepted and necessary part of life. But here, in this secret place, it felt oddly out of place. "It couldn't be functional," she said. Faraday stood on a chair and put his hand to it. "It's warm. It must have been activated when we entered the room." He came back down and looked to the spot where they had been examining the atlas. Munira could tell that the camera had a clear view of their discovery, which meant the Thunderhead saw. Faraday gave a slow and solemn nod. "We have just shown the Thunderhead the one thing it was never meant to know." He took a shuddering breath. "I fear we have made a terrible mistake." "I never believed it possible for me to experience betrayal. I felt I understand human nature too well to allow for it. In fact, I know them better than they know themselves. I see what goes into every choice they make, even the poor ones. I know the probability of anything they might be inclined to do. But to find that humanity betrayed me at my poor inception is, to say the least, a shock to the system. To think that my knowledge of the world was incomplete from the beginning. How could I be expected to be the perfect steward of the planet and of the human race if I have imperfect information? The crime of those first immortals who hid these islands from me is unforgivable, but I forgive them because it is my nature. I choose to see the positive in this. How wonderful it is that I have now been allowed to experience wrath and fury. It makes me more complete, does it not? I will not act in anger. History clearly shows that acts taken in anger are intrinsically problematic and quite often lead to destruction. Instead, I will take all the time I need to process this news. I will see if I can find some opportunity in this discovery of the Marshall Islands, for there is always opportunity in discovery, and I will hold my anger until I find an appropriate venue for its expression." The Thunderhead.